If people really did believe that Jesus played here when he was a lad, that would have got people flocking here, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, that would have driven a whole pilgrimage industry of people coming out here to see it, you know, and the support structure for it. It's just that sort of thing that people travel around to visit.
So you're really champing at the bit now, aren't you?
Well, of course I am. I mean, the point is that time and tide are the two things that wait for no man. We have got to get off of this island by early afternoon.
And we've only got half our diggers because the others are, I don't know if you can see, just round the headland there, up on that hillside. What are they doing there, Mick?
There's another chapel over there, halfway up the hill, and they're said to be the same size. One's said to be a copy of the other one.
But the mainland chapel has been excavated already, hasn't it, Phil?
Well, that's right. I mean, partially dug, at least. I mean, in the 1930s, some local Cornish archaeologists went in there. They were slightly eccentric ideas. They were desperate that it should be pre-Norman, and they kind of labelled it Celtic.
Yeah. What do we mean by Celtic, Mick?
It's a shorthand term in the West Country for something that's after the Romans, but before the Normans. But, of course, we don't have Anglo-Saxons in this area, so it's a shorthand term for that Dark Age period.
And it is a period that you are specifically interested in.
Yes.
Lights up his little face, doesn't it? The point is, that on that chapel over there were deposits there that were not actually dug, so we could actually get some dating evidence there. As far as we know, this chapel site here has never been dug, and we should get some dating here. If we could date either or both of them, that would be incredibly important.
Presumably these stones sticking through the soil here are a bit of a clue, aren't they?
You're an observant sort of a chap, innit?
The chapel we're looking for on the island was dedicated to St Michael, as was the one on the mainland. In fact, medieval pilgrims are known to have flocked to sites dedicated to St Michael all the way down the Cornish coast. Back on the island, we've already found some possible chapel walls.
Just sketched in roughly where that
Yeah,
L-shaped trench is going. So
And Stuart's nose for earthworks has sniffed out what he thinks is a nave for the pilgrims and a chancel for the altar.
You see, Phil's getting a bit of a wall coming out through there, which rather suggests that that's probably the first block, with perhaps that added onto it.
Right.
Mick's theory about the island chapel is a bit like Croft Andrews' theory that the monks at Glastonbury added a chancel to a pre-existing nave in the mainland chapel. And Andrew thought the original mainland nave was Celtic. So Oliver Crichton's been looking for clues as to why he did.
Just looking closely at this plan here from the Croft Andrews excavations in the 30s.
Yes.
Look at these two post holes. I'm sure those are worth looking at. And they're right next to what are marked on the plan as a set of steps running up here, up the slope.
So, why don't we put a little trench to take in those post holes and let's see if there's another one.
And if you're really lucky, it'll be an early feature.
That would be a very nice thing to find.
It's safe to say we can expect some rather complicated archaeology relating to different phases of chapels on both our sites. So what do you think the timeline might be? The very early, what they call Celtic chapel would be wood and we just find post holes.
Yeah.
Then what?
If we're lucky, we find post holes, and then we get a stone building on top of that, which is pretty small and pretty featureless. And then somebody comes along and revamps that with some nice architectural pieces, perhaps doorways, chancel arch, windows, in the 12th century. That would be my guess as to what we'd see on the site.
The structures themselves could be the best clue we have when it comes to dating, because chapels don't have the domestic rubbish that we usually rely on to date buildings. Hey, Phil, that trench is coming along, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got the beginnings of a wall, Tony. I mean, we always knew that there were those big stones just immediately underneath the turf, but now we've got it stripped off. You can see there's a nice edge there, but we really need to be able to get down to confirm that that is a wall. We certainly can't date it, but we can begin to suggest that it is a chapel. Jackie was showing me some bone earlier on.
What you got, Jackie?
The bits that are really of interest are these pieces here. Now, these are bits of human femur, and it's quite a large individual. You can see these ridges running down here. This is where the big thigh muscles attach, and they really are quite rugged. So this is quite a large individual with quite chunky thighs.
So we've got a mystery of a big-thighed person somewhere on this island at some time. And he might not be the only burial here, because human bones are said to have been revealed as the cliff faces have eroded. Glastonbury acquired this land sometime in the 12th century. and legal documents suggest that there was already a chapel on the island at this time. They also tell us who Glastonbury sent to set up their new pilgrim site.
We find that one of the witnesses of the charter was Elias, then prior of the same place, and his fellow monk John. And this is wonderful because we there have the staff of the little priory of Glastonbury Abbey at La Manor. Just 2 monks, because you have to have 2 monks as a quorum to form a monastery.
On the other side of the water, we found steps coming down the hillside into the chapel on the mainland, chunky stone walls, and a floor surface carved out of the rock face. It seems to be deliberately terraced into the hillside at exactly the same height as the island chapel. Isn't it weird looking back at our chapel from this chapel?
It is, and yet this is strangely familiar. I mean, when you look at the size of this chapel and you think about the earthworks over there, they are very, very similar.
On both sites, we're trying to find out whether the chancels were put in as part of the Glastonbury revamp. So where are you?
Well, our trench is actually running all the way across here.
So have you found the skeleton?
Unfortunately, we haven't found any skeletons, and we haven't even found it at the grave cuts either.
What about this wall?
Well, yes and no. Can you see this, what looks like a wall running here? There's almost like faced stones coming through. Well, they're actually floating on top of this dirt.
We need to get to grips with this wall to find out whether there was a nave here before Glastonbury added a chancel. And Bridge and Oliver have now found some post holes that might prove Croft Andrews' theory that this nave was Celtic.
It would have been a hell of a job cutting through that rock, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I haven't excavated them yet, but having stuck my trowel down, they're at least this deep.
So do we think we've got our earlier chapel, our early timber chapel?
If you're very, very lucky. On the other hand, of course, they could be late. They could be post-dissolution for all we know.
Yeah.
It's a whacking great thing.
It is, yeah. I was just trying to think, what is there that sits in the west corner of a church? The Western Gallery is something that was suggested, but I only know of post-medieval
They're post-medieval in date, yeah.
What we desperately need is some dating evidence.
It's just really maddening that you haven't got any finds.
Well, keep digging.
Nowadays, Looe Harbour's the starting point for a trip to the island, but it seems too far away from the mainland complex to have been used by medieval monks and pilgrims. And now Stuart has identified a more direct route between the mainland and the island.
Even today, twice a year, people and families still can physically walk across that gap at very low tide. It's sort of a pilgrimage, but there is the ingredients here for a medieval harbour.
A harbour?
Literally here. Now, if you look out over there, you can see how jagged those rocks are. They would really sort of rip the bottom off any boat that tried to land, even at high tide. And it's the same over here. But in this gap in between, in this bay, you've got these nice, smooth rocks in here.
Where this big sandy patch is.
That's right. So you could bring a boat in here at high tide.
If this is the place where monks and pilgrims embarked, you might expect to find lodgings nearby. And only a short distance away is a wall which Croft Andrew called the Monk's House when he excavated the site in the 30s. So based on the geophys, we're putting a new trench in to find out if this was where our 2 monks lived, or even a place where pilgrims could have sought accommodation.
If you look at that wall there,
Yes.
that's the kind of thing that we're looking for, and it's not pretty dissimilar to what we're finding down here, is it?
On our way to the island, the wind turns on us. And we're getting a taste of just how difficult this crossing could have been. It's 10:10. At last the tide's high enough for us to get back out to the island again, but hopefully Matt and the rest of the team have been digging for the last few hours. Tony to Matt, can you hear me? Tony to Matt.
Tony?
What have you been doing since we left?
Well, we obviously put in a couple of hours work. No, we got down to the beach, we found a kayak, we went out kayaking, and I had a dip in the sea as well. It was absolutely beautiful.
I'm so pleased for you, mate. See you in a bit.
See ya.
Despite appearances, our island team has made a lot of progress since we left. Tracy's exposed more of the north wall of the chapel, and Matt's been trying to find the east wall.
We've got through the rubble.
Oh, wow!
Yeah,
Oh, God, that looks like floor.
doesn't it?
In the West End, Ian's cleared a lot of rubble and found something a bit odd.
What on earth is that?
Well, it's a big lump of iron. Look, God knows how old it is.
And all that before hitting the beach.
Proper freezing.
Tough life.
We've got the wall now. It is bang on east-west.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing now is what is happening in here, because we've got all this. These stones are mortared in, so this is actually masonry.
Right.
Now, what I don't know, and I'm trying to resolve, is whether or not that wall comes along and turns. In other words, we're actually in the northeast corner of the chapel,
yeah,
or whether it's actually a big sort of swelling to take a buttress or a big column that might support a chancel arch.
Like the big stones we've got over here, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now you see down there, Matt had another wall.
Yeah.
Now, I did wonder at one stage whether or not that might be the south wall of the chapel. But now we've actually cleaned it up and looked at it, you can actually see that it's on a slightly different alignment. It's southwest to northeast.
Right.
So I'm rather hopeful, if it worked out all right for me, we'd have a wall coming here, be the northeast corner of the chapel.
Yeah.
This is the chapel. That would be a separate building outside it.
If Phil's right, the island chapel could be much smaller than the mainland chapel. So the theory that they were mirror images is looking a bit shaky. But it's early days. Ian hasn't found the west end of the chapel yet, although he has found plenty of other things.
Well, I'm plunging down into this deep, dark hole, and it seems to be full of Victorian rubbish. But at this end, we've got this huge wall, this revetment, down on this side.
That doesn't look Victorian to me. I mean, that looks like a prehistoric burial chamber or barrow or something like that. The whole thing does look a bit like a sort of big barrow on the top here, doesn't it?
You've got look to have more down there.
Yeah, there is a lot down here. You can see it's ranging from here to about here.
Yeah, so that looks like it's in situ. It's not moved anywhere.
So where's the grave cut?
Well, I think that these two large stones here, which end about here, mark one side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been thinking of as a wall here is actually marking the foot end of it.
Which is interesting, given that we've got that over there.
Yeah, it does look like that might be a head marker then.
Yeah.
The next one along.
Next one over.
Croft Andrew found a skeleton here, didn't he?
He found two here, but they were much higher level. Can you see in the section here, you can actually see where he took out this grave. And then it also seems that he took one from on top of this small wall here.
This gets better and better. The small wall was Glastonbury's chancel, and this means that Bridges' burial could well be related to an earlier chapel. And now Oliver's convinced he's found it.
Well, the evidence, we've got these two whacking great post holes in front of us, but the killer piece of evidence is the fact that they align really nicely with the rock-cut feature stretching off into the distance there, and the fact that together they're on a different alignment to the walls that we can see, only by a couple of degrees, but I think it's significant.
We've removed the chancel wall to reveal the grave Bridge found this morning and discovered it's potentially the earliest thing we found on the mainland.
The edge of the grave appears to be running along here. And as you can see, it's in a completely different alignment to this wall. So it's obviously going to be much earlier than this, but how much earlier is difficult to tell.
But what is interesting is that, you see, I saw these slates here, now tracking them back to establish whether it is actually a floor. And it looks like in this section, starting to get masonry, perhaps with a wall, and that's more on the right alignment to be associated with the alignment of these burials.
But the other nice thing about that bit of flooring is it's at the same level that that reliquary box is.
It looks like we're heading further back into the time of the Cornish saints, because the latest theory is that our burial and reliquary are from an even earlier chapel than the one Oliver found, which Glastonbury probably revamped by adding a chancel. And if so, pilgrims could have been coming to pay their respects to relics in this box long before Glastonbury's time.
So I can't get over digging down in here is just how much they've used the natural geology to really make the chapel stand out. Look, you've got solid bedrock over there, and look, I'm down over a metre down here, no bedrock. I think the ground must plummet away. This wall is right on the edge of the natural.
So they'd been right on the top of the hill. They could have seen the whole coastline and be seen as well, I guess.
That's right. But of course, because they've sited it here, they've had to make massive foundations, and they even splay out here to take the main thrust of the chancel. It's fascinating. It's a hell of a piece of engineering, I tell you.
OK, let's go.
Even as we're loading onto the boat, another kist burial emerges from under the south wall. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Tony.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, you're welcome.
It's beginning to look like this enclosure could have been a burial ground for thousands of years, maybe even into prehistory. Over the last few days, we've discovered that the story of our two chapels began long before Glastonbury's monks arrived, when Looe Island could well have been one of the earliest outposts of Christianity. And a chapel on the top would have been a beacon of hope for traders from the Mediterranean crossing formidable seas. Sometime later, another chapel was built on the mainland, at the same height, looking to the island, with our reliquary box at the altar for pilgrims to visit. And eventually, in the 12th century, Glastonbury's monks rebuilt both the chapels as a sort of St. Michael theme park. Over the last 3 days, we've just scratched the surface of this magical island, which has been a very special place going way back long before Christianity.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Bedford Purley Wood is in the Nene Valley in Cambridgeshire, about 15 miles from Peterborough. 1800 years ago, this was one of the wealthiest areas of Roman Britain, and our site would have been on the outskirts of Dura Breve, the main trading centre in the region. But while most Roman sites around here have been damaged by modern ploughing, it looks like whatever's hidden in these woods could be really well preserved. Our challenge is simple enough. What were the Romans doing here? But thanks to the trees, finding out isn't going to be that easy. The other problem is this is a national nature reserve and there's lots of protected plants here. John, you having a good day?
Wonderful.
For once, though, we don't have to wait for geophys, because in some places we can actually see Roman walls on the surface.
Look, this is silly. You can't have archaeology just... It's sticking above the ground.
Yeah.
It's not under the ground.
No doubt this is why the site was first discovered by an antiquarian back in the early 1800s. And it's because the remains are close to the surface that they've also shown up so well on this LiDAR picture. The colours, by the way, represent height, with green marking the low ground and white the highest. Phil, are you sure we're digging in the right place?
What do you mean we're digging in the right place?
Well, look at that. Lovely and neat. Look at that. Chaos.
I don't actually regard that as extremely chaotic. Come and have a look.
Sorry, there's a rather large archaeologist in my eye line.
Look, we've got a nice, long, straight row here. It's all built of stone. And look, we've even got one stone on top of another stone. Now then, what would you call that?
It's a wall.
Thank you.
I eat my words.
That's right.
What do you reckon we've got here?
Well, you see, this is the problem. You've got that plan which shows a series of earthworks.
Yeah.
It is very, very easy to assume that all the upstanding bits are walls. Now, when they dug here a little earlier on, they know for a fact that sometimes where there are earthworks, there weren't walls. Sometimes there were walls and there weren't earthworks. It is not as clear-cut as that drawing suggests. We don't also know whether or not it's the same phase.
So there was some sense in my point. Just looking at this tumble doesn't necessarily mean that you can interpret where the buildings are.
That is not your question. Your question was, are we digging in the right place? Yes, we're digging in the right place.
All right, I was wrong.
Well, I'd say it's a floor tile.
That looks like Roman floor tile, doesn't
Roman
it?
floor tile, yeah.
Yes, yep,
Promising.
Good. Very good.
So Matt's wall is Roman. And I have to say, it does look suspiciously like it belongs to the same range of structures that Phil's digging some 80 metres away. There's still lots of rubble to remove, but already Phil's discovered the walls survived to some depth, and in places are built with fragments of stone and tile, creating a herringbone pattern. 80 metres away in our second trench, Matt's finding that the walls he's unearthed are built in exactly the same way.
There's quite a few bits of floor tile out of there.
Oh, right.
But I think these were actually built into the wall and formed a part of the structure.
Right, because you get layers of tile in Roman walls. So
Yeah.
That rather suggests it is a building, I think. Yeah.
And there's been a few bits of pottery as well.
Oh, that's good, because there's very little from elsewhere. So what have you got? The local wares?
Yeah, that's Roman Nene Valley.
Yeah.
That's
rather good.
And we've also had a bit of iron ore as well.
Ah, no, that's good, because we've got a metallurgist coming tomorrow, so
Right.
you can have a look at that.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds, actually. It looks as if it could be a standard Roman villa, but the plan is suspicious, and I suspect the linking with ironworking is very intriguing.
John's persisted in his search for evidence of metalworking. He's been using the MagSus. That's a magnetic susceptibility machine to you and me. And he now reckons he's getting very strong signals over here on the western edge of the site. I've agreed to meet Mick out there, and I shouldn't get lost if I just follow the signs. 2 men and 2 signs.
Oh, yeah, don't take a notice of the signs. I wanted you to see this test pit here.
A couple of years ago, we had a little test pit here. It's been fertiled around by animals now, but you can see there's a bit of walling here. But very importantly, this produced a couple of bits of slag.
It doesn't look much, but slag is a byproduct of making iron, and it could mean we've got a Roman iron smelting furnace nearby.
There's a big enclosure around here. I mean, it's probably too big for a building, Ben, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, unless it's a very big old barn or something like that. It's certainly very large.
Yeah.
John, have you managed to cover most of this?
Well, we've done half the survey so far, and what's really interesting, here, to just show you the results. Look, the test pit is down here, and that's where you've got a bit of walling. But I'm getting really strong readings here in red, and I've done half the survey so far, and I'm sure that this is the concentration of the area of burning. And just look at the soil. Look here, it's really grey. Whereas in here, in amongst the trees, look, it's in silly, see the red clay. This is the concentration of the burning.
But professional to the end, John wants to finish the survey before we start digging.
And I'm confident this isn't barbed wire fence.
Good.
Because there are also an awful lot of pits showing up on our LiDAR picture, and quarry pits can be classic signs of Roman ironworking. So maybe we haven't got a villa here, but a specialist industrial site. So to help us find out, we've invited an expert in Roman metalworking to join us, and he's going to start by looking at one of the pits that seems to have a spoil heap around it.
If you look at this, and the orangey colour tells us there's a little bit of iron in there, but not enough to be worth smelting.
Right.
This is some stuff we found down the road, just in a cutting, and you can see, feel the difference in weight. Look at the colours.
I mean, I could spot that as iron straight away.
Exactly.
It's very different to that, isn't it?
This will occur in bands underneath this and stuff, so you've got to get this overburden off.
You've got to get through this potentially to get like that, have you?
Exactly,
right.
yeah.
With so many pits to check, it looks like Roger will have his work cut out. But what I find most surprising is that we could have so much industry close to what we suspect is a villa. Interestingly, we're getting evidence that people lived and cooked in the buildings Phil's investigating.
Cracking.
Absolutely
cracking.
This mortarium would have been used for grinding food like corn or maize to make bread, and it suggests that we could be close to a kitchen. In fact, we do seem to be getting the sort of finds you'd associate with a Roman villa. The problem is we're not finding very many of them.
Everything we'd expect to find on a villa site is here, both in terms of sort of range of material and dates, but in really small quantities.
What do you reckon's going on, Stephen?
The other way to look at it is to ask the question, what are they doing with their rubbish in the first place? I mean, if, for example, we've got evidence of ironworking here, could they be digging pits to extract the ore and then chucking their rubbish down the pits to get rid of it? And that would be a very simple explanation about why there isn't much material on the site, full stop.
Which is another reason to start digging those pits.
Exactly.
Yeah. But, and this is typical, just as I point out the shortage of finds, news reaches me that Matt's trench is starting to look really exciting. He's finding huge quantities of stuff, and it's all much posher than we've seen anywhere else.
Hypercaust heating flue tile, look, with the marks on it where the plaster sticks on. You've also got lots of roofing material. These are the clay tiles off the roof, one like that, and then a curved one over like that. So, you know, it's all looking much more like a sort of high-status building than we thought.
Is that painted plaster?
Yeah, you've actually got stuff with patterns on it, look, and red patches, and there's even more coming out where Matt is. You've got more of it there, haven't you?
There's actually a piece there in the top of this rubble layer with a black painted line across the top.
You've got the trench of the day, without any doubt, haven't you?
It's coming up with the goods, isn't it?
We could be thinking about we've got industrial activity here. You know, it's either some furnace or some oven or something like that, a kiln or something.
That's why we put the trench here. We wanted to know what was going on the inside of the building, and you've nailed it. You've got something that's giving us activity inside the building.
What on earth is that then, Anthony?
I have no idea. I've been trying to unravel it for us.
Yeah, I mean,
You got something, guys?
Well, we've got a nice piece of what appears to be possibly a bit of carved stone.
This?
Well, yeah, but what you can't see, Tony, is that round here,
Yeah.
it does look like an arm. It really does.
I wouldn't mind. If it's Roman and it's carved stone, that would be a big one for us, wouldn't it?
Yep.
You were the one who was saying, oh, it's very rare to find things like this.
It is very rare, but we have our occasional moments.
Of what he's uncovered here. Meanwhile, carefully placed in between the ant's nest and the deadly nightshade bushes, Matt's trench is revealing the first glimpse of some sort of posh structure.
You can see the mortar there.
Yeah, coming up, yeah.
Yeah, look, there's the edge of another one there.
Yeah, yeah, well, that could be a lead into a flue or something.
So this would have formed some kind of floor heating or something like that?
Yeah, if it's a hypercaust, yeah, there's sort of pili within the room itself. It begins to look ever more structural.
The new theory is that this bathhouse is not part of a Roman villa, but built for a manager or overseer who was looking after the ironworks here.
Is it possible that we're looking at some overseer here who's working on behalf of the state?
Right.
And the state, of course, I think, have a very, very large presence in the building underneath Caster Village.
Oh, yes, yes.
And it could be some procurator there who is not only superintending Fenland estates, but ironworking estates as well.
Yeah,
And how far is Caster?
Caster's fantastic, because it's only a few miles away that way.
And this was also excavated by our antiquarian.
Artist spent many years excavating at Caster, where he found enormous building complexes underneath the modern village.
It's a good idea. Our site, controlled from Caster, could have been one of several iron production centres situated on the outskirts of Dura-Brive, the main trading centre in the region. Ermine Street, the M1 of its day, literally ran through the town, and with the River Nene close by, iron could have been dispatched by road or river to almost anywhere in Roman Britain. And if this bathhouse was for an overseer, it looks like he lived in fine style, judging by these chunks of painted plaster that show the colour scheme of the walls of this building 1600 years ago. It's a stark contrast to Phil's trench, where there's no sign of painted plaster or luxuries like underfloor heating. But we did find what looked like a carved stone here yesterday. And now that our experts have had time to carefully examine it, I'm curious to know what they think it is.
It's a stone.
A stone?
A stone.
But not just any random stone. Phil thinks it's been definitely shaped for some purpose or other.
Take a look at this one here. Now, that was found just outside in the angle of the walls there.
Yeah.
Look how that ordinary stone has been used as a whetstone to sharpen tools. And it just goes to show that every stone you find on a site like this, you have to look at it, think about it, to make sure it's not an artefact.
Thanks, I think that's a very good lesson to learn from someone who was sure that was a statue last night.
It looked very good at the time.
But at least Phil's trench and Faye's trench put in here have given us lots of useful detail about the actual buildings in this range. This is a reconstruction of the area where Phil was digging, which we now know was a series of rooms based around a courtyard. We think these were workshops or living accommodation for the people who worked here. A workforce probably of slaves, which would explain why we didn't find any coins or items of real value here. The question now is, have we discovered the main iron smelting area up here on the slightly higher ground?
Sorry. I'm on the wall now.
Because you're on the wall, yeah, and I'm inside.
But I'm still over the floor of another room.
Possibly.
So you've actually got a wall running with... That still means that could be a door jam, and that looks like the corner where there was a door. Ah.
So there's a room there, and there's a room there.
But no wall.
Wall has gone, robbed away.
A lot more work's needed here, but we can get some idea of the extent of the bathhouse from the size of this earthwork. And if our theory is right about the link with Castor, then it's possible that our bathhouse was laid out like the one shown here in Artis's picture, which means we're talking about a building that would have looked something like this. It was probably a standalone facility used by the official overseer on what would have been a state-controlled iron working site. Our dig's certainly given me a newfound respect for this man, Edmund Artis, who was clearly a very good archaeologist for his time, but died before he could publish his written reports. His map of the Archaeology, drawn in 1828, has proved to be largely accurate, and it's not just the buildings, but also the pits he recorded that are key to understanding this site.
Goodness me, it's a journey to the centre of the earth.
What we now know is that in Roman times, a lot of the rubbish was being thrown in these pits.
So basically, this pit was open at the same time that those buildings were being occupied and used. And this looks a bit clayey to me. So is that what they're going for, the clay? Yeah, there's no sign of ironstone or any bands of ironstone in this at all. So it must be clay for some purpose. And the little sort of pock marks and things I can see in there, is this sort of root activity? Well, some of it is, but some of these dark patches, if you carefully clean them back, you can actually see adze marks or pick marks where they've actually levered the clay out from this pit.
Fantastic. We now know not all these pits were dug for iron ore. Many, like this one, would have been dug for clay to build and repair the iron smelting furnaces. So at the end of 3 days, we can now picture this long-lost Roman settlement as it must have looked in its heyday around 200 AD. What's been hidden in these woods is a massive ironworking site, with the furnaces and ore roasting pits on the slightly higher ground, while the mining was going on here, chasing the seam of natural iron ore. The workshops and living quarters were not far away, and were very much second class, as mentioned by Edmund Artis. But there was at least one fancy Roman building, a bathhouse, situated well away from the industry here on the eastern side of the site.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Behind one of the wildest and most romantic coastlines in Britain lies Bodmin Moor. Barren, windswept, and dominated by huge, craggy tors. Weird granite outcrops that have been sculpted by millions of years of harsh Cornish weather. This is a landscape that's been witness to thousands of years of human history. A recent archaeological survey recorded hundreds of prehistoric settlements here. But no one can say for sure how old they are, or even if they're all the same age. Do we have any idea how many people would have lived here during the Bronze Age, Ian?
When we carried out the survey, we recorded at least 200 settlements and 1,500 individual houses within those settlements. But what we can say with certain is there are at least a couple of hundred people up here at any one point, maybe even a couple of thousand.
Is this a doorway?
It is, yeah.
It is eerie, the idea of going into somewhere that's maybe 5,000 years old. What exactly are we going to do here, Francis?
We're going to do an excavation, dig a hole, and find evidence that will suggest, yes, this was a house, or no, it was used for livestock, and we'll also date the thing.
I mean, we don't actually know that all of these are roundhouses. I mean, some of them could be stock pens, they could be clearance cairns. If we can identify areas of burning, that may indicate hearths and so help with the interpretation. Then we've got the whole landscape beyond.
But no one's been able to accurately date the whole settlement. some structures on the moor could be thousands of years older still, because 500 metres away to the northeast is another huge man-made feature. We suspect it's Neolithic, and if it is, we're talking at least 2,000 years before the Bronze Age. But our local experts think that the first settlers here were drawn towards Roe or Rao Tor. They'd have been in awe of these rocky outcrops, and there's evidence that they were worshipping here.
Here at Rao Tor, we've got the hilltop enclosure, which we know was probably Neolithic in date. There's other examples elsewhere on Bodmin. And these are almost certainly some kind of tribal gatherings, centres for ritual ceremonies, a meeting place for people to come together and sort of celebrate their lives within the landscape.
I think it's one of those sites where what's below ground actually might not be as informative as actually what's above ground. There's the stone sizes, there's the shape and size of these banks or cairns, whatever they are. We can look at how they're constructed, what they line up within the landscape. So this is a classic case. We've got to start looking at the obvious and try to understand what it's telling us.
Phil?
Yo?
Come and have a look at this.
In Phil's trench, he's beginning to suspect this bank is far from being a random pile of stones.
And what I'm noticing too, this is bang on line with the edge of the cairn. There's a load of upstanding stone. They just stick up out of the ground.
Oh, yeah.
And they go right the way through here. I reckon this is going to prove to be the edge of the cairn. The build-up and the makeup of it is going to be over that side. And on that side is the collapse where it fell out.
Tumble up.
And I've got exactly the same thing on my side.
The light here on Roe Tor would have been as dramatic to the ancients as it is to us today. They worshipped the sun and ran their lives by it. And thinking about it, so do we. Despite the impetuous weather, it's been a good first day in our 2 house circles. The diggers have finally got into their stride. Over at the cairn, they're now looking at stones that haven't been seen for thousands of years. And look at this. We're now deeper than the antiquarians got down to, and this surface too is maybe 5,000 years old. And tomorrow we're going to dig into it to see whether this was a place where people lived, or maybe where they buried their dead.
I think you can vaguely see across here where it used to be, and there's fewer stones, but we've gone out beyond that, and you can see here all these collapsed stones here, which just go over the wall of the house there.
There's masses of them.
It's huge. In fact, I think there might be even too many for a wall there.
Yeah.
And we have had a couple of finds as well. There you go, a lovely little thumb scraper.
Oh, wow, look at that. And it's been burnt.
Yeah, it's burnt flint, and it was found outside the walls just over there.
Oh, that's interesting, because the 2 scrapers that were found by Dorothy Dudley's team were also outside. Look, there are these dots there, just outside the entrance. And have you seen anything that might be a target for carbon dating?
Possibly. You see the layer that we've come down onto there.
Yeah, it's all quite black.
Nice dark black, and in the very centre of it, there is in fact quite a strong concentration of charcoal. I think if we put a slot across the back or something, and got a section down there and got a good sample of it, we probably could get something.
At last, we're getting to grips with these stone circles. We've got trenches open in 2 separate buildings, and it would be fantastic if they were both part of the same potential Bronze Age village. But without doubt, the biggest mystery on the site is Phil's Neolithic cairn, built 6,000 years ago by the earliest farmers who only had stone tools. This monumental structure is over 500 metres long, and Francis believes it's no coincidence that it points east and towards the Tor. He's also convinced that it's unique in Britain, with only 1 or 2 other Neolithic monuments even remotely like it. When we were up here yesterday in the pouring rain, it looked to me like a rather random jumble of stones that you might put up to stop sheep wandering about. But looking at it now, it looks like a really big structure.
Well, the thing is, Tony, about these really big structures, they're very carefully put together, or the whole thing collapses. So I'm hoping that Phil has got good evidence for how the thing was actually built.
I mean, you can actually see it on the surface, Tony. I mean, if you look up the monument, you can see that there are actually 2 parallel rows of stones running right the way up its length. And we've actually got some evidence of it in the trench here. Look, there's that big boulder which is sticking up through the surface of the grass. And we've got these big boulders coming down here. And actually the infill is much smaller boulders. And if you really want to see the other side much more clearly, look at that whacking great stone in there.
Yeah.
So what you've got are these 2 parallel, they're like walls.
So do you think the original shape would have been like a gentle slope and then a flat top?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's definitely got a real definite shape to it.
What about the buried soil?
Well, we're just beginning to get a point where I think we've got it. At the top is this sort of browny grey stuff, but the important bit is this very black stuff. Now that black stuff is the buried soil, but the important thing is that it's underneath this stone here.
OK, we've got something that looks like a wall, but how do we know it's prehistoric? Why couldn't it be from any period?
Well, it's the formality of that facing which is very, very striking. It's been deliberately placed there, and I think placed there to be seen from either side. And this is exactly what you get around the huge Neolithic burial mounds, the chambered tombs of Orkney and Ireland and all over the place. And that is very much a Neolithic feature, or even an earlier Bronze Age feature. I'm actually quite excited about it, because I think that's as diagnostic as anything else we've found to date.
Absolutely.
It would have been a heck of a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. Well, the whole point of these huge monuments is to bring families and people together from a large area of countryside. So the big monument represents a whole series of gatherings of the tribes.
It's job creation. It's keeping the unemployment figures down, basically. To think that people were designing and building structures like this up to 6,000 years ago is mind-boggling.
I was looking in the topsoil over the other side of the trench, and I've come across this bit of green glass and this piece of vessel rim.
Oh, right.
It looks a bit suspicious to me for the prehistoric or post-medieval periods.
Well, this is going to throw a cat in among the pigeons, because this is Roman glass. It's the rim and then shoulder with a little piece of white trail slip along the bottom.
Oh, I see. It is a little bit lighter just there.
That's, well, it's very rare for Cornwall, and I'd say it's about 2nd or 3rd century AD, which is a great surprise. I got to admit, I hadn't expected to find Roman glass out here in the middle of Bodmin Moor.
The first really juicy find from these house circles, and it's definitely not Bronze Age. But it does suggest that Roman tourists or pilgrims might have come up here to visit these ancient ruins, anything from 1,000 to 3,000 years after the buildings went out of use.
You'll have to deturf by hand, because...
Raksha's now opening our 3rd trench in the house circles.
Go for it!
This is the first structure we've dug that hasn't been excavated before, and we've got great hopes for the finds here. Over at Phil's Trench, the Neolithic bank cairn is proving to be a far more complex structure than we could ever have expected. So rather than going for a second trench, Phil's decided to concentrate all his efforts on deciphering this cross-section of the monument. In World War II, the army drove tanks straight through this bank. And although this desecration hacks Phil off, there's a big plus.
Yeah, it's a veritable arsenal, look.
They've been used. That one's got a clearly dented end.
Yeah, I don't know what that blue one is. High explosive. But then, of course, we found this morning. Look, this barbed wire, and that's in amongst the stones. That's the consistent thing. It's all in amongst it.
All
loose,
amongst
rubbly
the
stones.
loose, voidy stones, yeah.
These World War II finds confirm that some of the loose stones on the sides weren't part of the original Neolithic structure and must have been redeposited when the tanks breached the cairn.
That one's a really interesting one, actually.
In the lab, we're adding to our picture of the landscape as it looked when it was first farmed.
They're dung beetles.
Where'd you get them?
We got them from the section where we were doing the processing in the stream.
And what do they tell us?
They actually tell us about the environment. They're telling us that there were animals grazing in the area when the deposit was formed.
How can you work that out?
because there was lots of dung, and that's what they were interested in.
OK, this tells us there was animal dung here, but can you work out which animals the dung came from?
You can sometimes, yes. They tend to be associated with large herbivores such as cows, sheep, goat and pigs and horses and things like that. So, yeah, they can be quite useful.
Is it true you sometimes dream about beetles?
It is, Tony, yes.
What kind of dreams?
I had a nightmare about one last night.
This is a big one?
It was a very big one.
Emma's dung beetles confirm that livestock such as cows and sheep have been grazing these uplands for at least 5,000 years. And we may also be getting closer to knowing when early farmers occupied these houses. We're still digging all 3 stone circles. Last night we discovered a hearth in Trench 1, and Ian's digging through that very carefully. And is coming up with material that the people who lived here might have thrown in the fire.
There you go. It's a broken piece of flint. Very nice.
In Trench 2, Bridge is struggling with her first find of the day. But it's not delicate archaeology she's dealing with.
Oh, sorry, that was really tricky. The frog's bite.
In Trench 3, Ratcher's nearly ready to lift some of the stones. This is the one house circle that hasn't been dug before, and underneath we should have intact Bronze Age archaeology. We've also found a scatter of stones in all 3 of our house circles. And Francis is sure it's not a coincidence.
This is a house. I mean, little doubt about that because there's a hearth there. But you look in front of you here, there's a large heap of rocks, and that heap of rocks looks for all the world like a cairn, and cairns are normally burial mounds.
It's a bit strange turning your house into a burial, isn't it?
And it is possible, of course, that there is a burial here, a dead person beneath that cairn, but it's also possible that it's a cairn to the house, to the life in the house.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's very difficult to leave a home, isn't it? Especially if you've enjoyed living in that home, if you've enjoyed being on right, or you're leaving it forever. You turn the house into a cairn, turn it into a monument.
Oh, it is a lovely idea, that, isn't there? Is there any way we can test it?
If we carefully unpick this cairn, we can see whether it comes after the house or late phase of the house.
It could be that they make the house a monument, but they may also be burying artefacts of life. The artefacts they use, like pot and other things in the house, could be found underneath the cairn, decommissioned in the same way.
That would be good. Ooh. It's just after lunch on our final day, and at last something's come up in Trench 3 that could focus this whole dig. It's a small sherd of pottery. And this could be the first piece of evidence that puts our house circle firmly into the Bronze Age.
Carl, I'm so excited about this because this is the first piece of pottery we've had in this trench.
Well, I think you're very right to be excited. This is Bronze Age pottery. It's what we call Trevisca ware here in Cornwall. It's dates from the Middle Bronze Age. So yes, this is a very exciting piece. And I've just noticed on the interior, if you look carefully, you can see the black area.
Yeah.
That's actually internal residue, and that's the last meal that was cooked in this pot.
So we're thinking it's about 1500.
Yeah, it's around about 1500 BC.
It's odd that something that looks so insignificant can tell us so much. This piece of Cornish Trevisca ware confirms this was a Bronze Age home. And what's more, we know they were cooking here 3,500 years ago. Back in the farmhouse, Ben and Emma are beginning to run tests on some floor surfaces from the house in Trench 1 and material from Phil's cairn. Organic matter, such as discarded food or animal dung, rots down and leaves phosphates. Animal dung was commonly used as fuel in Bronze Age houses, and by running these tests, it could give us an indication of the level of human activity.
Because? Well, obviously sat around the fire, just waste, rubbish being dropped onto the ground, and that persists in the soil over the millennia, basically.
Emma, what are your initial impressions?
Basically, we've got the hearth sample that's gone very blue, very quickly, lots of phosphate, lots of activity. All the way through the centre of the house, we've got, you know, again, evidence of phosphate. And even outside of the door, And that's really gone quite blue, and that went quite fast, didn't it, Ben?
Yeah.
Again, we've got evidence of phosphate.
On the lower line, there are 3 that have hardly any phosphate at all and one with just a tinge. Where were they from?
Phil's trench from the bank cairn. As you can see, we're not really getting much evidence for high phosphate levels in those at all. So, you know, clear distinction between the different trenches in terms of the concentration of phosphates in the soils.
This is the sort of science I can really identify with. These organic remains have been locked in the soil for thousands of years. The phosphates also tell us there was little human or animal activity near the cairn. It was possibly a place kept sacred to the memory of the ancestors. Back on the moor, real archaeology is catching up with the science. Bronze Age pottery seems to be coming up everywhere. In Trench 1, Matt's found some more near the hearth. For 2,500-year-old pot, this is really special.
It's got that decoration on it, hasn't it?
Yeah, where the cord's been pressed into it.
Yes, it's Trevisca ware. It's exactly like what Carl was showing me earlier on. That's sometime in the Bronze Age, isn't it, Francis?
Yes, it is. It's in the Middle Bronze Age, to be precise, between roughly 1500 BC and 1000 BC.
Right.
And this is another piece, also of Trevisca ware, but I think slightly classier, that
Yeah.
one, with the cord-impressed chevrons, zigzags.
Absolutely.
And that came from Rackshaw's Trench, along with another little
Right.
bit in here. Now, the importance of that, of course, is that all of his pottery is identical. And that means that the 3 houses that we've dug out of all of these houses are all contemporary, and that means, I would guess, a penny to a quid, but all of the houses are part of a village. So we have ourselves a Middle Bronze Age village.
That is absolutely fantastic.
This is the first time that anyone's been able to confirm that this is a Bronze Age village, which is a great achievement. And our environmental team can add to the story. There's no evidence in the pollen analysis that our Bronze Age farmers grew any crops up here. It seems they carried on clearing the trees for fuel, and over the centuries, the soil became too acidic to support anything else. It would seem that unwittingly, generation after generation of Bronze Age people were responsible for changing the face of Bodmin Moor forever.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.